to everybody. I hope you guys are all well. Thank you so much for joining us for Off Balance, this opportunity to transform higher education with within COVID uncertainty. I'm so delighted to be joined today by Joy Strickland from Mount Vernon Nazarene University. Hello.
Hello, great to see you, Rachel.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this conversation that we're going to have today. You know, we've been spending so much time over the last couple of months talking about the practicalities, how our job is different now than it was, processing what's happened over the last couple of months, thinking about the future in the fall. And I think in this session is a time for us just to pause in the middle of all of this transformation and challenge, and also acknowledge that there's a lot of opportunities for us to do things differently than we've done before. And I love that kind of big picture thinking where we're able to just assess how we've always done it and make a decision about whether that's a good way to do it or if there are some changes to be made there. So very excited about this opportunity this afternoon. I want to talk just for a second about our roadmap. So I want for all of our attendees to hear a little bit about you and your work in higher education. I want for us to talk about what balance means, so kind of the status quo, and then also for us to talk about the opportunities that come from off balance, and then think about how we can transform our institutions in strategic changes, practical changes, and opportunities. So the first thing that you'll see is we're doing a poll. I'd love to know, Joy worked in in student life for a long time and now has transferred over to the academic side of the house. I was under academics when I worked, but I was doing very much student life kind of work. So we would love to hear from our attendees, which side of the house do you fall on? And I know, especially in higher education, a lot of times that can be pretty, that can change often. So for right now, where are you guys falling on that academic and student life side? And let me just, as you are responding to that, remind you that we will be giving you the PowerPoint and the video so that you can send this to other people who might be interested in what we're talking about today. So let's see, I have our poll up. It looks like we're almost dead even. I think we've got 45 on the academic side and 55 on the student life side. So pretty similar distribution there. I think that will be really helpful to us because we're talking about kind of two different languages depending on where you fall in those sides. So we'll make sure to highlight both of those pieces. And I also just want to say, remember that everything that we're doing is cast in this light of how do we make sure our students are seen? How do we make sure that they have the right connections and the right resources at the right time to be able to be successful? And so that's always the foundation of all of the work that we're doing. So Joy, will you introduce yourself to us?
Absolutely. I'm Joy. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Success and Retention at Mount Vernon Nazarene University. I've been here at MVNU since 2017. I've also served at several other private colleges, including Colorado Christian University, Gordon College, Houghton College, and I'm also a Taylor University undergraduate.
So you have a long reach for all those different schools that you have both learned at and been on the staff there. And so Mount Vernon is a fairly new transition for you, and that's where you moved over to the academic side of the house, is that right?
That is correct, yes. Yes.
Perfect. So can you tell us a little bit about your institution?
Absolutely. I'm excited to share with you about MVNU. So our traditional undergraduate program is a little over 1,400. We also have a professional studies program that has around 400 undergraduates within it. So our total enrollment lands at 2,222 currently. We were founded in 1968, so we're a relatively young institution. We were founded by the Church of the Nazarene. We're in a very pretty rural location in the middle of Ohio. We're a liberal arts Christian institution with a wide range of programs, a lot of your traditional liberal arts, you know, your English, your history, your psychology. We also have social work, education, engineering, and nursing. Our motto is to seek to learn, is to seek to serve. And the majority of our students are from Ohio.
Great. And you guys, do you have a couple of locations?
Good question. We do have some of our professional studies programs are in local areas in Ohio.
Okay, perfect. So I think as you and I were talking about this idea of being off balance, we kind of came to a place where we said, first we need to talk about what being on balance means. And we want to look at that in terms of higher education, in terms of an independent or a individual institution. And then also we want to talk about our personal balance. So let's kind of walk through those. I think in higher education, you have two ways to look at things. One, it tends to be more of a quickly adapting approach to things. So we see what's happening and we have to make these changes and we're going to do these things, not because we've done a lot of research on it, but just because we've got to make a decision about it. So you have rapidly adapting. You also have, in that same kind of spirit, the let's try it. Let's see if it works. So no, we've never done that before. Let's try it. And then also that perspective tends to be very agile. So we tried something and it doesn't work. We're not going to do it again. We're going to try something else, right? Do you see that perspective with your colleagues and just in general in higher education? I think it's a newer perspective in higher education, this like quickly adopting perspective.
Yes, I definitely see that. And it's interesting because sometimes that is institution specific. Sometimes it's kind of your two sides of the house, academics versus student life. Sometimes it's more program specific. I do think as technology has made us all have to adapt faster, some of that has started earlier, but I think COVID has definitely all of a sudden forced us to all, whether we want to or not,
right.
We're having to learn more of the adaptable, quick change around.
Absolutely. And I think, if we think of higher education traditionally, we think of a more steady, thoughtful, let's talk about it, let's form a committee and let's study it and decide what have other people done, what has worked, what has not worked. You do have this perspective of slow down, let's be reflective about what we're doing and make sure that we're making good choices. And also, traditionally in higher education, we have very critical thinkers. I mean that in a very learned way, right? That when you're talking about on the academic side of the house, faculty are really good at processing information, finding places where it doesn't make sense or where further research is needed, and giving a critical perspective to what people are saying and doing all over. And that I think is a more traditional perspective of higher education, but I think technology for sure has something to do with the fact that we are having to have this other side more. And these two sides don't see the world the same way, right? We might have some fundamentally different perspectives on what's going on, just depending on how you kind of think about that. So Joy, can you talk about, you alluded to this earlier, the idea that every school has kind of a different mix.
Absolutely. So, I think it's important to acknowledge the differences between institutions. So what I'm sharing are some general thoughts, but for everyone listening, you need to filter this through your institution, your departments, and your programs. And even though I'm going to present it a little dualistically, I want us to try and not think dualistically, because all areas do all the things I'm going to mention. However, there tends to be a propensity towards one or the other. So take what's true and not true at your institution and within your individual areas. But when we kind of look at the side of student life, typically student life, its departments, its staff, tends to be the voice of the students. They tend to be co-curriculum focused. They tend to often be the ones coming up with creative solutions and being very adaptable because their work requires that. Really our entire student body almost changes every 4 years because the students go on and graduate, and the new group of students, they're different, and you have to learn that some programs that you've done will continue and last for years, and others you have to change up because they just don't work with the new group. Yeah. On the other side of that tends to be the academic side, which tends to be the voice of experts, very curriculum focused. and a little more focused on proven and studied solutions. What's important as you think through these things and think, is this true or not true of my institution, is also thinking a little bit, even if you find those things to be true, think about, well, who in student life is great at researching and evaluating? Or think, who in academics knows the voice of the students and is a creative innovator? And a lot of what I found is this idea of collaboration and partnerships is always really, really important. But in this particular day and age right now, we need that to be able to succeed, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So I'm really curious for our attendees to think about, do you tend to have a more reflective style where you say, we want to study it, we want to understand it? Or are you more on the side of the house that's like, hey, let's try it and let's see if it works? Because to your point, Joy, I think if you're not listening to each other in both of those places, we will make some mistakes that somebody who sees the world differently than I do would be able to uncover for me, right? So if I tend to be a let's try it. I think you do too. So if we are the, hey, let's give it a go, let's see what happens. If there's somebody who's more reflective, who can say, hey, wait a second, let's think about this a little bit more. I think there's a lot of strength there. Now, I'm sure that this is just a coincidence that this poll is exactly the same as student life and academic, the academic side of the house in terms of 55% reflective. Now we're even. So 50% reflective, 50% let's do it. So I think that that's really interesting because, you know, there are things about each of those sides that tend to attract a certain kind of person. So I would love for the attendees also to be thinking about, how would you classify your institution? So we have institutions that are fully reflective, that it takes them a very long time of serious study and real conversations to decide to move forward with a program or a difference or an innovation. And that's a culture of an institution, right? And then you have other institutions that have a culture of, let's try it, let's see what happens. If we like it, we'll keep it. If not, we'll throw it out. They're always changing. So it would be really interesting as you consider what you tend to be. I would love to hear maybe in the questions and answers or in the chat, just the similarness between your personal style and then what you would assess your institution to be. And I don't know, you've worked at a lot of different institutions. Do they have clear cultures for you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that that's true.
And I've appreciated all of them, but that's partly too, there are always some adaptations you have to make once you understand the culture, what you bring, but also working within the parameters of the institution itself.
That's absolutely true. That respect for the culture is very important, isn't it? I also wanted to throw in here, so we talked about the balance of higher education. We've talked about the balance at your particular institution. I also would like to say, I think there's a lot of controversy about what's going to happen in the fall because you have people with these different perspectives. And I would just like to say, I don't think any of us are our best selves right now because we're stressed and we're feeling overwhelmed and we're doing really hard work. And what tends to happen when you're stressed is that you become more entrenched in the easiest perspective for you. And the reason is because we don't have a lot of energy to be like, okay, now wait a second, let me see a different perspective or let me think about that. It's just easier for us to kind of tend to whichever side we normally tend to. And so when we're talking about how to change higher ed, just remember that you and your colleagues are in a position of stress and digging in to whatever the perspective is that comes easiest for you. And I think part of how we change things is we listen to each other. We are understanding of each other. We do have the same goals in mind, which is we want our institutions to be successful and we want to do the right thing for our students. And so I think some grace in that is really important. I would also say, please remember that we are not going to do, this is not an ideal situation to be in, and we are going to make mistakes. And every institution is going to decide something different based on where they are and what they're doing and their culture. And there will be somebody who will be critical of every decision that you make, because you can't do it perfectly. It's not going to be ideal. You and I talked a little bit about this, about kind of what you're hearing in terms of it's not ideal what we're going through. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, it's interesting as I've been reading some of the articles and resources that are out there, and honestly talking with faculty at my institution as well as other places. And, you know, the way someone described the shift to me, and I've seen this not just with one voice, but multiple voices, is this idea of, you know, before COVID-19, at least in our institution, you know, we had people that were really good at providing in-seat education. And then suddenly COVID hit, and they had to suddenly get very good at providing virtual or online education, but also not traditional online like we talked a lot about at our institution. We couldn't just adopt what was happening on the adult and professional studies side, which does have an online program, because our students were telling us things like they really liked synchronous classes, and they were in just very different situations. And so it was finding and adapting to a very new normal. At the same point, as we're looking towards fall, now the request is more of hybrid, you know, like expect that some students will be in seat. This is our institution's plan, and some will potentially be online. And so that's a whole nother framework of kind of like, okay, I was expert at in-seat. I adapted and tried to become really good at online. And now I have to do both, which is actually a really different thing.
Yeah.
And everything I'm reading, there's a lot of ability to point all the problems with all three of those.
Right.
And in fairness, there are problems with all three of those. I think that I've noticed a shift of some people are stuck in those problems, and it's a little hard to figure out, how do I get to the next step? But the reality is there aren't a lot of other solutions, you know? And it's like, well, right now our choices as institutions are to go completely online. Our choices, really, there isn't a choice to go completely in seat. Like that's actually not on the table.
Because you don't have
hybrid
space
version,
to be able to do that, right? I mean, that's the problem, is we don't have space to do social distancing and have everything in seat.
Yes. And then hybrid, you know, is, so really there's only two options, completely online or hybrid. And our students have also been very clear that they don't want online. And for some of them, they will not be academically successful online. There are other things within their life that would make that really complicated. So it's just that there is no great solution. And I think it's important to acknowledge, as you know, we have these two different sides, you know, some groups that are pointing out really good problems and things we do need to think about and try and work around, but also how do we do that quickly and fluidly. And I think there is a piece of what I keep trying to remember, I'm kind of big on silver linings in the clouds, is just that idea of we probably can do better than we think. And there are opportunities within this. And that's not to dismiss the challenge and the difficulty, but if we work together, what's the best we can do? And we can provide something good for our students and each other.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea that you come to the table with somebody who's like, here are all of the problems with what you're suggesting. And you're like, yes, that is true. But now we have to do a thing, right? And I think that both listening and acknowledging, yes, there are problems, and then saying, but we can't live in that place. We've got to actually do something. I think that's part of why that being off balance is such a helpful position to be in. So it's good. I think as we're talking about why transformation is necessary, we're talking about how your value proposition is becoming more clear. Students don't want to take online classes. They want to be on your campus. You know, we've been analyzing the survey that we sent out to students, and one of the things we ask is, what are you going to miss most? And it was really interesting because they were saying, like, I'm going to miss connections. I'm going to miss going to class because I feel isolated when I'm taking online classes. I like the freedom to grow, to become more independent. I don't want to live with my family anymore. But I love this one. They also talked about, I need the environment and the resources and the physical space to be academically successful. And that language, I think, is going to be so important. As we understand, we have to transform, but these are the things that are really valuable to our students that are going to keep them coming back to our campuses and helping us be successful in that. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to that one?
No, I'm good.
I think we know we have both revenue and expenditure stresses. So we're having to spend more money because we have to do different cleaning and we're moving online and we need more software. And then also, you know, students are unhappy about fees that they've paid when it wasn't what they expected. All of those sorts of things. Our schools are stressed on both sides. And I think the way you come out of that is you have to be really innovative, you have to be reflective and smart, and then you have to make some really important changes. So I want to talk about this idea of an off-balance transformation. So this is, I think I've said to you all before, my training is as a counselor. And so one thing that is true about being off balance is that it is the easiest time for you to change. So if you think about your relationship with your spouse or with your children or with your parents, everybody has a script that they say all the time. So if you have a conflict that you have all the time, I know I'm going to say this and my husband's going to say this and I'm going to say this. And then we just follow out that script and then we get to the same place that we've always gotten before. One of the ways that you change that script is you refuse to follow it. You just say, I'm going to put you off balance. So you can't revert back to the way that you've always done it. There's something about not knowing the way forward that makes it easier for you to change what you're doing because there's not an easy path for you to follow, which I think is really important as we're thinking about what's happened on our campuses in the last 4 months, 5 months. Everybody is off balance. We don't know the way forward. And the advantage to being off balance is also, if you think about trying to change something that you've always done, there is a huge investment cost in changing because you have to learn a new thing and you have to consider, and there's no easy solution that just comes automatically to you. You have to really invest in change. Joy, I loved what you said the other day about what happened between spring break and online classes, right? That was an investment in change that every institution made, and people ended up doing things that they 2 weeks before would have never imagined that they would have done. So that investment in change has already been taken care of. We don't have a way forward that is an easy path for us to take. The brain calories that we have to expend to make a decision, we have to, because there is no other option. We can't go to in-seat. We've got to think about that really differently. And so the investment to change has been totally solved. You have to invest. It's not like, do you want to or not? And that puts you in a position then where you have this opportunity to make different decisions. Anything to add about the investment in change, specifically as you're thinking about your faculty and student life on your campus?
I guess I would add, I mean, there were a lot of actually fun stories I feel that came out of with faculty I talked to who would acknowledge, you know, I knew about some of these resources like from our faculty resources. I'd never used them before and they actually worked better than I had expected. I loved hearing, I've heard from faculty at various institutions, hey, some of my students that weren't as interactive in class are much more engaged online. And so those investments in change, I think they did see some immediate results and had, I think, some good pride that they were able to take on that challenge. And, you know, really by the end of the semester, things were going very well.
Yeah. You also were saying that faculty, because of this investment in change, they had a different experience in engagement with their students. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. I loved this part. We actually did a lot of surveying and a lot of talking with our students to figure out how things were going because things were difficult for everybody all the way around. And we're trying to adjust things as we needed to. And specifically, one thing I started noticing was our students were saying quite a bit that faculty were their lifeline. Moving home meant that a lot of our traditional great student life programs that were still reaching out to students and still doing good work, but it was the faculty that were the consistent presence that they were seeing all the time. And those faculty were doing amazing things, like more kind of traditional student life roles, like, you know, literally students, we don't have money for food, and they were getting that resource to the right person. They were answering questions, they were providing emotional support, they were having one-on-one Zooms, and, you know, just trying to help students through that experience. And, you know, they were doing that on top of trying to change how they present all their curriculum, and they still had all their grading and all the new things they were learning. But I loved hearing many faculty were like, I really enjoyed that. Like, I got to know some of my students better than I traditionally have because some of these conflicts, and not conflicts, but these challenges.
Yeah. So I love that because it's such a great example of when you take out the boundary or the barrier of, do you want to invest in this change or you don't want to invest in this change, right? You have to. And then you have a different perspective of the new way that you're doing things. And you learn new rules and new relationships and new things about this new way that we're doing things. So I think the reason that we need to highlight this is because we're going to talk in a minute about how you can be a change agent at your institution, how you can use this opportunity to change things. And it's really helpful to be able to say, when you're off balance, you have the best chance to change. The investment in change has already been made, right? These are talking points that you can use as you're pitching different ideas to your administration, or even within your purview, to say, please do not waste this opportunity where we're really off balance. I also think it's helpful to say, hey, it feels very risky and too quick. Especially for a certain kind of person. I mean, I tend to be chaotic and I tend to be like, hey, let's pick this thing. It feels very risky and quick to me also. So I can't even imagine if you're somebody who is reflective and wants to think through things thoroughly before you make a decision, how scary it would be to have to make this move. And I think that language is really helpful to use with people, to say, hey, it feels risky and quick to me too. But we do have to do something. So I think that that's helpful. And then also I would say, as you're talking about this on your campus, please remember that it really requires leadership, because there is no path that has been tracked already. We can't follow in somebody's footsteps and say, oh, well, when we had a pandemic, 10 years ago, here's what we found worked really well. You have to be in a position where you say, I'm going to walk forward, and I don't know where we're headed or how this is going to go, but let's stick together and follow me. I'm willing to kind of walk into the unknown. And also the language that we use about solving problems upstream. So trying to figure out what can I solve now so that when we get to August or September or November, we're not surprised by problems that we never saw coming? Is there something we can do now to lay the groundwork so that those problems would never come? And I'll tell you, reflective partners tend to be very good at seeing all the pitfalls, right? They can tell you, hey, and this is what's going to happen in September, and you have to be careful about this. And so that can be hard sometimes to hear, but also helps you solve this problem before it ever develops into something else. Do you have something you want to add about that idea?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Can you talk about the voice of the student?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. Really, this whole situation has allowed us to hear more from students in some different ways that have really helped to expand our understanding of our students, expand some of their challenges, as well as some of the strengths they bring to the table. I think when we think about the voice of students, a really important factor is the opportunity for different ways for students to engage. And so at our institution in the spring, Student Life organized a phone campaign and literally tried to call every student on campus. And then within my area, we did an online survey in collaboration with Pharos. And then we actually did a second one in the summer too. And that really allowed us, between those two things, to get a really good idea of what was going on with students, and then gave us kind of the opportunity to then think, okay, so what are we in charge of? What can we change? We had to look at what have we done so far, and we sometimes had to pivot into something else. And so it really is important, whatever role you're in, if you have that opportunity to be the voice for the students, to make sure that you understand that responsibility and are willing to share that. And then, like at my institution, I found there was so much gratitude for being able to specifically say, you know, sometimes it was data, these are the numbers and this is what it looks like. And sometimes it was more the comments that students shared or the personal conversation that happened.
Absolutely. And I think the compelling reason to speak up for these students is because you have information that nobody else has, right? That wow, I have an insight into what's happening in these students' homes and for them and the struggles that they're having. And I am compelled to tell other people about it because that is the only way that we can find our way forward successfully. So I think that what you said about like, I have a responsibility to tell people this is what's going on and really shape their understanding. And also I have a responsibility to ask students what's happening with them, right? We need to be figuring out what their experience is. And that is a responsibility I think that we take very seriously. So as we're considering an opportunity for you to think about doing things different, to grasp this being off balance and consider new things, there's a couple of really big strategic ideas that I want us to talk a little bit about. And then I want to talk about what can I do differently in my job right now? So what do I have control over? I think these strategic institutional ideas are, as you are helping people understand this opportunity to change, the way that you frame that, the way that you talk about it with your colleagues and with other people on campus, open space for you to be able to make some of these really big decisions. So you and I were talking the other day about every institution has a framework for success. So if that's we're delivering on our mission, or we're looking at retention, or we have these things that we have decided are the way we're going to measure success. Those things are not necessarily different now. We just have to continue to talk about those things in this new environment. Can you say more about kind of how you were thinking about that premise?
Yeah, I think that it was just a lot of a big reminder that our vision and our mission had not changed. And so with these new challenges, sometimes it's easy to kind of get into the weeds of trying to figure out, how do I fix this? And sometimes though, the fix didn't necessarily align with who we were or what we had promised to students. And so we kept having ourselves go back to actually our real mission and challenge ourselves to be like, okay, can we find a different solution? Is there a different way to do this? And, you know, that kind of leads to that second thing of necessity is the mother of invention. And it was really exciting to sometimes see, you know, something like trying to call all of your students and your whole campus, like that's pretty ambitious. And we were actually, I'm trying to remember our percentage, but I mean, it was like 90% or higher that we actually had some response to. So the reality is we learned not to say, no, that's not possible. No, we can't do that. It was a little bit more like, hey, we're going to try. Yeah. And, you know, we're not going to consider it a failure or a disappointment if we don't get to 100% or even if we don't get to 75%. But it's that reality of we needed to try it. And the results were, we learned so much that there's no other way we would have known some of what we knew, which helped us better serve our students from that point on.
I love that because it is like, hey, we need to do a thing, right? So if you think about like in November, if we're like, hey, should we try to call all of our students and see how they're going? And everyone will be like, no, that's crazy town. That's never going to work. They're not going to, right? Well, then you get to the place where you're like, hey, no, we need to do that. And so let's try this crazy thing. And it has success, which you could not have guessed. Right? You wouldn't have said like, oh yeah, I'm sure we'll be able to talk to most of them. That's crazy. But because you had to try it, you did, and you had great results with that. I love that. Also, I really liked when you were talking the other day about pairing past successes with future successes and talking about what we've already done, which seemed inconceivable and like we would never be able to accomplish it. And then leveraging those things as we think about what still needs to be done. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that's been an important part of our conversation when we kind of start looking at fall and thinking, oh no, we can't. It's been important to go back and say, we didn't think we could do all these things we did in the spring, and we did them. The other thing that I would say is, this connects to what we were talking a little bit earlier, but I'm a part of some, listservs. And it's interesting because I feel like from what I read sometimes, some more reflective thinkers, like there's a wide range of what that looks like. And sometimes it really is helping to identify the issues which are helpful to coming up with a better solution. But sometimes it's an entrenchment. I've not seen that at my institution, but I've seen it a lot in the listservs that I'm looking at, where it's like, well, we can't do this. And it's important to be able to help people to reframe when they have that belief. And what we've really found is going back and saying, well, remember when you did this, remember when you put all your classes online, remember when we tried this program and it worked. Yeah. That has then kind of built an openness to considering and buying in a little bit towards, okay, you're right. I'm going to try this. I'm hopeful about it being successful.
Yeah, I do. I do think in the long run, we will look back at March to May of 2020 and just be like, wow, what happened there was amazing. And obviously, hindsight is clear vision. So we did make mistakes and there are things we would do differently, but I think you're right. There was a lot of successes in what happened, both on the academic side and also on the student life side as well. This last point is just to be thinking about what enrollment management is talking about. And I would tie to this both admissions and retention. That when you are asking students what's happening and you're the voice of students and you know what they value about your institution, speaking that language to them in a retention perspective, speaking the vision of come back, use our spaces, be with us. We want to take good care of you, right? That's super helpful. And then also for admissions to be able to know this is what we want to say about the opportunity that we had in March and how we've taken advantage of it. And then also how things are going to be different, but we're excited about that. Not that it's going to be dreadful and everyone's going to be depressed, but we have some exciting things happening because we had this shakeup that happened to us in March. Okay, so let's talk now about some really practical, like I'm in charge of this thing and I can change it. And I would love to hear attendees, if you, as you were off balance, anytime from March until now, and took a look at something and said, hey, we've always done it this way, but we can't do it this way anymore, so we're going to change. Or if you have a best practice that you want to share with us, I love learning from each other. I think depending on where you are and what your institution is like, everybody has such creative ideas. So I would love for you to chat that to us so that we can highlight that, maybe even ask some questions about it. But let's talk through some of these. So do you want to talk about student input?
Yes, absolutely. So I alluded to this, that we did some phone campaigns, texting campaigns, 2 different surveys, and we just found the student input gave us a lot of information that we had not known before. So for instance, 25% of our students had some sort of internet computer access issue. And when we just moved them all online, that was really important for us to know. And that was information I could take back to the rest of my faculty colleagues, because they were running into resistance and, being like, well, that student actually has to drive to, the parking lot of a restaurant or a church to be able to get Wi-Fi, change the dynamic of the situation. And there just was so much we learned through the process of that. Also just a lot, we learned a lot about their family environment. For some, going home was not a positive, and it made things that might have already been rough at school much, much harder at home. And then even in some areas where, family was great, maybe they had started having food insecurity issues or other types of things. So it really expanded our knowledge and a little bit of our knowledge about how in general, our institution is a very safe place for our students. And some of those things that we provide with, and this is every institution, your library study rooms and the computer labs and all those things that are inherent into what you've built out to serve students, what a difference that is, when those structures were taken away. I also think it's something we continue to need to think about because we don't know completely what fall is going to look like. Each institution has their own plans, but that is the challenge of we are just going to have to stay flexible and adaptable.
And can I say, I love the idea that maybe in one's office, we were not asking students about their experience, that we were not doing surveys about these specific things. What happens to you over the summer? Or why are you not taking online classes? Or what's difficult for you about this? Or what do you love about our campus? And part of this off-balance-ness has uncovered is that we should be asking them, hey, tell me about your meeting with your advisor. Is that useful? Are there different things that we could be doing in that would be helpful to you? Tell us about your experience with the Career Center or with whatever those different places are where our students have a lot to teach us about both their experience on our campus and also, as you said, what's going on with them at home that makes this community on our campus such a safe haven for them where they have what they need. So I love that practice of we've learned we should ask students what they think and what's going on with them because they uncover things that we would never have guessed. Can you talk a little bit about the summer retention plan? So this is an idea like, hey, maybe we should be working on retention in the summer, which I don't think many schools do.
Yeah, this was actually when Rachel and I talked about this one quite a bit because it's one that now, honestly, I'm like, why haven't we been doing all of this before? And I have a feeling even after we're through the crisis of this, a lot of these pieces are going to remain. They're going to be pieces that become a regular part of what we do. But like most institutions, and maybe some of your institutions do more of this, so I'd love, again, the ideas and things that other places are already doing. We've always had some summer retention plans, but they were mostly focused on the students that weren't registered. They were involved with summer programs that we had happening on campus where students were still here, some faculty interaction, those kinds of things. And it became apparent from our surveys and just the reality that our students left campus in March. So March all the way until August is a long time for them to be gone. And so we started having conversations about, well, how could we stay engaged with them? And there were things that were just really neat. Our campus ministries area was like, well, we can still kind of do a little chat once a week on Instagram where it's, not a full-blown chapel message, but it's some words of encouragement. It's, some learning. So they've been doing that weekly. We're kind of like, how can we do some virtual events? How can we keep in contact with our students? So we actually kind of have a card campaign of literally handwritten notes that we're sending to students over the summer. And what are their affinity groups? And, and as I say some of these things, we found challenges in some of this, this becomes very much highlights, oh, these are all our 10-month positions. So right. Who's going to do this or who could do this or who has time to do this? But it's been a really great experience to be trying to provide more for our students during this time frame. And I do think it's important to long-term service to students for helping them to be successful. And then it's going to have a side benefit, hopefully, in retention.
Absolutely. So one of the struggles of this summer retention plan is that so the opportunity is that all of a sudden we thought, oh, well, if we were going to try to do some retention outreach during the summer, what would we do? And I think a lot of schools have both what I would like it to be like in the future, if there's an opportunity to resource it. And if it were an ideal plan, here's what we would do, and we would have people to be able to do each of these things. And also the reality that we threw this together and had to find people and it wasn't an investment. It's not like 4 years ago we were like, hey, we're going to save this money so that then we can start doing retention planning during the summer. So I like the idea of both. Let's try it, and it's working, and we're seeing good results with that. And then also getting our reflective thinkers and people who want to study and see what happens to look at what we did, what the impact of that is on our retention and our student success, and then to think about how could we make that better and resource it so it can continue to impact our retention in a good way moving forward. I think when we said, when we were talking about this the other day, we were saying, right now we're in a deficit position because we're just trying to keep our retention moderately good for the fall. We're not going to be breaking records in the fall just because of everything that's happened. But if you think about a traditional year, those summer retention plans will have a very big impact on student success and retention as well. Okay, and then one other thing that I want to think about is this online versus Zoom classes. So you talked a little bit about this. My summary of the difference between an online and a Zoom class is that an online class was created for a highly motivated group of people who the primary need that they have besides the education is that it is as flexible and adaptable as possible. So they want to be able to take classes whenever, and they're very, very motivated. And what we heard from 18 to 22-year-olds was that is not them. Right? They're having a hard time being motivated. They need the structure of a class period to come, even if that's just on the computer. They need to be able to ask questions in real time and to have faculty explain things to them. And so the idea that you have faculty who really know how to teach this kind of student and that they might deliver it in a different way. They might be delivering it online, but it is not our traditional, like all the research about online classes is not about 18 to 22-year-olds who didn't pick online classes, right? It's about a really different perspective. And you found a lot of that with your students. Anything you want to add about that? Okay. So I would say, kind of in summary, this idea that we have an opportunity to both look at strategic things that we've done, institutional things that we've done, and change how we're thinking about them, how we talk about them, what we do, not fully because things are different, because of where we are kind of in this pandemic, but also because it is a chance as we are off balance to say, we've already invested in change. Let's decide what's the way to do this forward, not just to say we've always done this. And I think the position so many of you guys are in is if you are thinking about how do we change moving forward, how are we innovative, how do we take things that we did because of COVID and continue to adapt those, you're helping other people on your campus understand those things. And in the same way you're a voice for the student, I think you're a voice for, hey, let's hold on one second and really think about how we can change and how we can do things better and differently as we move forward. And the space to have that conversation is, it is imperative that we give mutual respect, both to people who are like, hey, let's try it, and to people who are like, let's think about it. And that space where you respect each other and you're trying to learn each other's language, I think is where some of these innovations and things can move forward as you're understanding this other perspective. Any closing thoughts that you want to add?
I think, yeah, you just reminded me of, I think there also is an important piece with that to expand the voices you're listening to. And when I think of the solutions we came to, it was because we brought some different people to the table than we sometimes do. We brought some students to the table, actually. We tried to have different representations from a variety of departments. And so I think when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about new ideas, it's important to have a multitude of voices at some points, not every point, but it's also willing to, consider an idea no matter where it comes from. And we really found in doing that, some of our best ideas, came from some areas that I don't think we always had at the table to begin with. And so that's another challenge of, this made us expand. This made us bring more people in. How can we continue to do that?
Yeah, that language is so good, right? Not like that's a wrong perspective, but like that's a perspective I never would have thought of. I would never have thought that someone could see it that way. Thank you. That makes then our intervention stronger because we are gathering different voices and looking at it from all of these different angles. So I do think that that's really powerful. I would just say coming out of this, besides embracing this off balance moment, continue to ask your students how they're doing. I say all the time, I'm very eager for 12th day to come in the fall, because then we're going to know where we are and what we have. But until we get there, we're just constantly trying to gather information so that we have a clear perspective of what's going on. I think talking about what students are telling you, feeling compelled, feeling the responsibility to help your institution understand their experiences and their needs is a really weighty responsibility. And no matter what area you're in, you can do that effectively as you think about not just their voice, but also what are we doing that maybe doesn't serve them in the best way. Sharing with other people about these off-balance opportunities as a way to change. And then also I would say, there are so many good resources for people to be thoughtful about what they're doing. If you didn't do a student survey, we have a lot of resources about people who did do student surveys. And what we've found over all institutions is that it's pretty consistent in terms of what students are reporting. Those kind of resources to share with your faculty or to share with other people, I think, put us in the right mindset of opportunity, and not in this place where we're like, wow, it's really hard. We feel overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. So I think sharing those resources is helpful. This is a website where we have all of the resources we've done over the last couple of months. We're adding some new ones about the difference between online and Zoom classes, and also students' specific requests for how they need to be cared for in the next couple of months coming forward until school starts. So please use those resources, share them. I think that is just, we're all hungry to be educated and to have space to think about, what's happened to us in the last couple of months. Joy, thank you so much for joining me. I always am so edified, and also you make my brain spin with all of these different ideas. And I feel really educated every time that we talk together. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Rachel.
Yeah.
I always love talking to you and feel like I always get a lot of good ideas that I can take back and figure out how to implement them at our institution.
Awesome. Thank you. You guys, thank you so much for attending. We will send you a copy of the webinar so that you can send it out. And please, I would love to hear about the opportunities for change that you see on your campus and how this will spur us in higher education to do things differently and to think about things differently. So thank you guys for joining me. Always good to serve you. Have a great day.